Living alone at 26 in a rental cabin on the outskirts of the Appalachian foothills comes with its own set of rules, especially when you are a freelance photographer who keeps odd hours and forgets things constantly. The little clapboard house tucked into the eastern Kentucky wilderness had been Rowan's sanctuary for nearly 2 years, settled at the end of a dirt road where civilization gives way to forest and the nearest neighbor sits a quarter mile through the trees. Her landlord, an elderly man named Harold, who lived 3 states away in Florida, basically let her do whatever she wanted as long as the rent check arrived on time. The spare key under the ceramic frog planter by the front door had been her safety net since her college dorm days, a habit she carried with her through 3 different apartments because she had locked herself out more times than she cared to admit. That Friday evening in late October started like any other, except for the fog rolling down from the mountains, thicker than usual, turning everything beyond her porch into gray nothingness that swallowed the trees whole. Rowan had spent the entire day shooting a wedding at a resort 2 hours away, the kind of assignment that paid well but left her exhausted from smiling at strangers and capturing their perfect moments. She pulled into her gravel driveway just after 9 o'clock, her camera bag heavy on her shoulder, her mind already planning the editing work ahead. The fog had followed her up the mountain, tendrils of it creeping between the pines like something alive and searching. She walked up to her front door, fishing for keys in her jacket pocket, and froze. The door was unlocked, not just unlocked, but standing slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible between the frame and the edge of the wood. Rowan stood there for a long moment, hand on the doorknob, telling herself she must have forgotten to lock it that morning in her rush to leave. She did things like that all the time. Left the stove on, forgot her phone, walked out without securing the deadbolt. She pushed the door open and reached for the light switch. The living room flooded with warm yellow light, revealing everything exactly as she had left it. Except it was not exactly as she had left it. The wood stove in the corner radiated heat, its iron surface warm to the touch when she passed by it. She had not used that stove in 3 days, not since the unseasonable warm spell had made it unnecessary. The coffee mug she had left in the sink that morning sat in the drying rack, clean and spotless. Her throw pillows on the couch, usually scattered where she tossed them, were arranged in perfect symmetry against the backrest. Small things, easy to dismiss individually. Together, they formed a pattern that made her skin crawl. Rowan called out, her voice sounding thin in the quiet house. No response. She walked through the first floor, checking the kitchen, the bathroom, the small office where she edited photos. Everything looked normal but felt wrong, like a stage set designed to mimic her life. In the kitchen, she noticed the cabinet doors were all open, just a crack, maybe an inch each, every single one. She never left cabinets open. The sight of those uniform gaps made her stomach turn. She opened the trash can and immediately wished she had not. Inside were food containers she did not recognize, Thai takeout from a restaurant she'd never been to, an empty energy drink can, a brand she never bought, and at the bottom, a pair of latex gloves turned inside out, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. Her cat, a orange tabby named Carver who normally greeted her at the door, was nowhere to be seen. She found him eventually, wedged under her bed upstairs, his ears flat against his skull, hissing when she tried to coax him out. In all the time she had owned him, Carver had never hissed at her. Not once. Something had terrified him badly enough to change his behavior. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her heart hammering, and that is when she noticed the bedroom door. She always left it open. Always. She liked the cross breeze from the windows, liked Carver being able to come and go as he pleased. But the door was closed now, firmly closed, the latch caught. Rowan stood slowly and backed toward the stairs, her phone already in her hand, her thumb hovering over the 9. She should leave. She should get in her car and drive away and call the police from the road. But this was her house, her space, and she needed to know. She needed to see with her own eyes what had been done. She climbed the stairs again, each step creaking under her weight, and stood in front of her closed bedroom door. Through the wood, she heard something. Breathing. Slow, measured, steady breathing. Someone was in there. Someone was in her bedroom, behind that closed door, breathing. She should have left. She should have run. But instead, Rowan turned the knob and pushed the door open. A man sat on her bed. Just sat there, calm as anything, like he belonged there. He was in his mid-40s, weathered face, graying hair, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. In his right hand, he held her chef's knife, the 8-inch blade she had noticed missing from the kitchen. He was not threatening with it, not holding it up or pointing it. He was just running his thumb along the edge, testing the sharpness. His attention focused on the blade with an almost meditative quality. When the door opened, he looked up at her and smiled. A genuine, warm smile, like she was an expected guest arriving right on time. "You are home earlier than usual," he said, his voice pleasant and conversational. "The wedding must have wrapped up quick. They usually run until at least 10. The words hit Rowan like a physical blow. He knew where she had been. He knew her schedule. He had been paying attention, close attention, watching her. Patterns. Her hand tightened around her phone, but her body would not move. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring at this stranger in her bedroom. This man who knew things about her he should not know. "Who are you?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood up slowly, the knife still in his hand, though he held it casually at his side. "I've been keeping the place tidy," he said, gesturing around the room with his free hand. "You work so hard, come home so tired. Figured you could use a little help around here. Got the stove going for you. Washed up your dishes. Even swept the porch this morning after you left." He had been here this morning. He had been here while she slept. The realization made her knees weak. He moved toward her, not quickly, just a few casual steps, and she noticed he was positioning himself between her and the stairs. The pleasant expression never left his face, but his eyes were wrong, flat, and empty despite the smile. "I should call the police," Rowan said, lifting her phone. "No signal up here," he replied. "Not inside the house anyway. The mountains block it. You have to go out to the road to get a bar or two. I know. I've been here enough times to figure out the dead zones. Enough times." He had been here enough times. This was not the first visit. This was not even the second. Rowan felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. How long had this been going on? How many times had he been in her house while she slept, while she worked, while she went about her life completely unaware? "You need to leave," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Right now. Get out of my house." His smile faded, replaced by something that looked almost like hurt. "Your house," he said softly. "This is not your house. This is my house. I grew up here. My parents owned this place for 30 years before Harold bought it. I slept in this room, ate at that kitchen table, learned to walk on that porch. This has been my home since before you were born." He took another step toward her, and Rowan bolted. She ran for the stairs, her photographer's reflexes giving her a split-second advantage. She heard him behind her, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood, but she was already halfway down. She hit the landing and sprinted for the front door, grabbed the knob, twisted it, locked. The deadbolt was engaged from the inside, and her keys were upstairs in her camera bag. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers slipping, refusing to cooperate, and then he was there at the bottom of the stairs, watching her struggle. "Back door is jammed," he said conversationally. "Wood swelled up from the rain last week. Takes some muscle to get it open. You would not make it." Rowan abandoned the front door and ran for the kitchen. The window over the sink, the one that looked out over her flower bed, was her only option. She grabbed a chair, slammed it against the glass. The window shattered outward, in a spray of shards. She knocked out the remaining pieces with the chair leg and hauled herself up onto the counter. Behind her, the man appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I will see you tomorrow then," he said calmly, as if she was leaving for work rather than fleeing for her life. Rowan threw herself through the window frame, felt the remaining glass tear at her jacket and jeans, and landed hard in the muddy flower bed below. She rolled, got her feet under her, and ran barefoot across her yard, down the dark driveway, into the trees, toward where she knew the neighbor's house sat through the woods. Behind her, she could hear his voice, still calm, still pleasant, calling out through the broken window. "I kept everything so nice for you. You will see. You will understand eventually." She ran until her lungs burned, until branches cut her face and roots tried to trip her, until she saw the lights of the neighbor's house through the trees. She pounded on their door, screaming, and when they opened it, she collapsed into their entryway, sobbing, trying to explain. The neighbors, an elderly couple named the Donnellys, called the police while wrapping her in blankets and checking her for injuries. The cuts were superficial. The terror was not. The police arrived within 20 minutes and searched her house. They found evidence that made Rowan physically ill. In the attic, hidden behind old insulation, they discovered a sleeping bag, a camping stove, and a plastic storage bin filled with receipts from her trash, old mail with her name on it, and a journal. The journal was the worst part. It detailed her daily routines going back 6 months. What time she woke up, what she ate for breakfast, when she left for work, when she returned, what she wore, what she watched on television. Every mundane detail of her existence, recorded in neat handwriting, page after page after page. In the crawl space beneath the house, they found more evidence of his presence. Empty food containers, water bottles, a pillow and blanket. He had been living there, underneath her, coming and going through the access panel in the utility closet she never used. They arrested Gregory Dalton the next morning at a motel in town. When they searched his room, they found it was a shrine to Rowan's house. Photos of the exterior from every angle, including shots taken through her windows at night. Photos of Rowan herself, sleeping, working at her computer, cooking dinner. Over 300 images documenting her life without her knowledge or consent. He had keys, too. 3 different sets, all originals, hidden in places around the property that only someone intimately familiar with it would know. Behind a loose board on the porch. Inside a hollow fence post, buried in a coffee can under the front steps. Gregory confessed readily. He genuinely believed he still lived there. His parents had sold the house to Harold 15 years earlier, after his mother passed away, and his father went into a nursing home. Gregory had never accepted the sale as legitimate. In his mind, this was still his family home, and Rowan was the intruder. He had been maintaining it for years, even when previous tenants lived there, though none of them had ever realized it. He watched them, learned their patterns, came and went like a ghost. The police told Rowan she was lucky. The previous tenant before her had broken their lease suddenly after only 2 months, claiming they felt watched. They had been right. Rowan moved out within a week. She broke her lease, forfeited her deposit, and did not care. She could not sleep there, could not exist in that space knowing what had been done, what had been violated. She moved to a 4th-floor apartment in the city with security cameras and a doorman and neighbors on all sides. No spare keys, no hidden access points, no dark woods pressing close. Gregory Dalton was sentenced to 5 years for stalking, breaking and entering, and criminal trespass. He will be out in 3 with good behavior. The detective who handled her case told Rowan that Gregory asked about her at sentencing, wanted to know if she was keeping the house clean, if she was remembering to check the wood stove. He was genuinely concerned, like they were roommates who had lost touch. Rowan does not go to the mountains anymore, does not take assignments that require her to drive rural roads or stay in isolated places. She triple checks her locks every night and has cameras in every room of her apartment. But what keeps her awake is not the memory of Gregory sitting on her bed with her knife, or the 6 months he spent watching her, documenting her, living beneath her like something from a nightmare. What keeps her awake is the letter that arrived last month. Prison postmark. Her new address, which she had been so careful to keep private. Inside was a single sentence in that same neat handwriting she recognized from the journal. "I kept the house so nice for you. I hope someone is doing the same where you are now. The real horror is not the stranger who breaks into your home. It is discovering they never thought they were breaking in at all. It is learning that for months you shared your space with someone who believed they had more right to be there than you did, who watched you live your life while you remained completely unaware of their presence. It is the knowledge that the locks we trust, the keys we hide for convenience, the privacy we assume are all just illusions. And somewhere, right now, Gregory Dalton sits in a cell counting down the days until he can go home. Because in his mind, home is still that clapboard house at the end of a dirt road in the Kentucky mountains, and Rowan will never be able to convince him otherwise. Quinn went to concerts alone. It was not something she advertised or felt the need to explain, but at 32 years old, she had learned that waiting for friends to share your schedule and taste in music meant missing out on experiences that mattered. So when the indie rock band she had been following for years announced a show at a converted warehouse venue in Asheville, North Carolina, and her roommate bailed at the last minute citing work deadlines, Quinn bought a single ticket and went anyway. The venue was called The Foundry, a massive industrial space that had once manufactured textiles before being repurposed into an events hall. It held 3,000 people when packed. And that November night, it was absolutely packed, bodies pressed together in the beautiful chaos that only live music can create. Quinn positioned herself in the middle section, not too close to the stage where the pit would get violent, not too far back where the sound would muddy. Perfect position. She had arrived early, claimed her spot, and settled in to wait for the main act. The opening bands were fine, energetic but forgettable, and Quinn spent the time between sets on her phone, scrolling through nothing, sipping overpriced beer from a plastic cup. Around her, the crowd grew denser as showtime approached. The air thickened with body heat and anticipation. She felt good. That particular kind of anonymous contentment that comes from being surrounded by strangers who share your enthusiasm. Then the fire alarm went off. Not the brief test chirp everyone ignores, but the full sustained shriek that cuts through everything, painful and impossible to dismiss. The house lights came up, harsh white floods that destroyed the atmosphere instantly. The crowd groaned collectively, annoyed but not yet worried. False alarms happened at venues like this. Old buildings, sensitive smoke detectors, someone vaping too close to a sensor. But then Quinn noticed the security guards. They appeared from doors she had not seen before, wearing black tactical uniforms with reflective yellow vests, the kind you see at major events. Except she had been to the Foundry twice before, and the security staff wore red polo shirts with the venue logo. These guards moved with a military precision, spreading out along the perimeter, their faces blank and professional. One of them, a man built like a linebacker with a shaved head, stepped onto the stage and spoke into the lead singer's microphone. "Everyone please move toward the rear exits in an orderly fashion. This is not a drill. Proceed to the back of the venue immediately." The crowd started moving, a slow shuffle at first, people grabbing their jackets and drinks, making jokes about getting their money back. Quinn moved with them, carried along by the press of bodies, but something felt wrong. The guards were directing everyone away from the main entrance, away from the big rolling doors where she had entered. They were pushing the crowd deeper into the building, toward the back of the venue where she remembered only restrooms and storage areas. She looked around for smoke, for any sign of actual fire, but saw nothing. Smelled nothing except sweat and beer and the faint industrial mustiness that always hung in old factory buildings. The corridor they funneled into was narrow concrete walls on both sides, overhead pipes running the length of the ceiling. The fire alarm was quieter back here, which made no sense at all. Fire alarms are designed to be deafening everywhere, to drive people out through any available exit. They do not get quieter as you move deeper into a building. Quinn felt her chest tighten. Around her, people were starting to notice the same wrongness, their conversations shifting from annoyed to uncertain. The guards appeared every 20 feet along the corridor, spaced like checkpoints, their flashlights cutting through the dim emergency lighting. Each one gestured forward, always deeper, never offering explanation or reassurance. The smell changed as they walked. The beer and sweat concert smell gave way to something stale and chemical, like old cleaning supplies and mildew. The walls sweated moisture, condensation running in rivulets down the concrete. Quinn tried to check her phone for the time and realized she had no signal. Not just weak signal, but completely dead, like the device could not even find a network to connect to. She looked at the people around her and saw others checking their phones with similar expressions of confusion. A woman beside her, maybe 25 with purple hair and elaborate tattoos, turned to Quinn and said, "This does not feel right. Fire evacuations do not work like this." Quinn nodded, grateful someone else had vocalized the fear she was trying to suppress. They kept walking because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant being crushed by the crowd pushing from behind, urged on by those blank-faced guards. The corridor sloped downward, a gradual decline that became more noticeable with each step. They were going underground. The foundry did not have a basement. Quinn knew this because she had read about the building's history, how it was built on bedrock, how the foundation sat directly on stone. Yet here they were, descending into something that should not exist. After what felt like 10 minutes but could have been longer, the corridor branched. Two identical passages split off in opposite directions, both disappearing into darkness, beyond the range of the emergency lights. The guards at the junction started separating people seemingly at random. A hand on a shoulder, a gesture left or right, no pattern Quinn could discern. When she reached the junction, a guard grabbed her arm and directed her left. The woman with purple hair went right. Quinn tried to pull back, tried to ask where they were going, but the guard's grip was iron and his expression was utterly vacant. Eyes focused on nothing, face slack. She was pushed into the left corridor with about 50 other people. Behind her, she heard someone shout, asking to stay with their friend, and then a scuffle, a cry of pain cut short. The left corridor narrowed further, and the temperature dropped. Quinn could see her breath misting in the air. The walls were no longer concrete, but something older, rougher, like carved stone. This was not part of the foundry. This was something underneath it, something that had been there much longer. The person in front of her stopped walking, and the whole line compressed, people bumping into each other. Ahead, someone was screaming, a raw sound of pure terror. The guards appeared from behind, pushing, shoving, forcing the line forward. Quinn stumbled, caught herself on the wall, felt the stone under her palm, cold and slick, and somehow alive with vibration, like a heartbeat pulsing through rock. Then the lights went out completely. Absolute darkness. The kind that makes you forget which way is up. The screaming multiplied, echoing off stone walls, distorting into something that did not sound human anymore. Quinn pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. In the darkness, she heard the guards moving, their boots on stone, and they were chanting something in unison. Not words she recognized, not English, not any language she had ever heard. The sound crawled into her ears and made her teeth ache. Someone crashed into her and she nearly went down, but hands grabbed her, too many hands pulling her upright and forward. She tried to scream, but her throat was closed, vocal cords paralyzed by terror. Red emergency lights flickered on, dim and hellish. Quinn found herself in an enormous room, gymnasium-sized, with a low curved ceiling that pressed down like a crypt. Metal folding chairs were arranged in precise rows, hundreds of them, all facing a raised platform at the far end. Some of the chairs were occupied. People sat motionless, faces forward, hands folded in laps. They did not react to the new arrivals, did not turn to look, did not move at all. The guards herded Quinn's group toward the empty chairs, forcing people to sit. Quinn resisted and received a sharp blow between her shoulder blades that knocked her into a seat. Around her, others were being similarly forced down. On the platform, a man appeared. He wore a white suit that was too clean, too bright in the red light. His face was pleasant, forgettable, the kind of face you could not describe 5 minutes after seeing it. He smiled at them and began speaking in a calm, measured tone about recruitment, about purposes they would soon understand, about how their presence here was not random, but carefully selected based on demographic profiles, social media activity, purchasing habits, patterns of behavior that marked them as suitable. The seated people, the ones who had been here before Quinn arrived, turned their heads in, perfect unison to look at the new arrivals. Their eyes were empty, pupils dilated so wide the irises had vanished, leaving only black. Quinn felt her mind trying to break, trying to shut down rather than process what she was seeing. This was not real. This could not be real. Concerts did not end like this. Buildings did not have rooms like this. People did not become whatever those things in the chairs had become. The man in white continued speaking, his words washing over her like water, and she realized with mounting horror that she was starting to understand him, starting to nod along, starting to feel the logic of what he was saying make sense in a way that should not make sense at all. Then the alarm changed. Not the false alarm that had started this, but a different sound, harsh and mechanical. The building's actual fire suppression system. Sprinklers activated throughout the room, raining water down on everyone. The man in white stopped mid-sentence, his pleasant expression faltering for the first time. Smoke began filtering into the room from somewhere above, real smoke, acrid and choking. Someone had set an actual fire. The spell, whatever it was, broke. The vacant-eyed people in the chairs blinked, looked around in confusion, started screaming. The guards moved toward the platform, toward the man in white, ignoring the crowd. Quinn did not wait to see what happened next. She ran. The crowd surged toward where they had entered, a stampede of bodies all trying to fit through a corridor built for orderly lines. Quinn was carried along, half running and half falling, water streaming down her face, smoke burning her lungs. Behind her, she heard shouting, orders being given, but the voices were panicked now, human again. Whatever control had existed dissolving in chaos. The corridor seemed shorter going back, or maybe terror compressed time, but suddenly they were at the junction, and then in the main corridor, and then bursting through a loading dock door into the cold November night. Fire trucks were pulling up, their lights painting everything in alternating red and white. Quinn collapsed on the pavement, gasping, coughing, surrounded by others doing the same. Emergency responders moved among them, checking for injuries, asking questions no one could answer coherently. The official story formed quickly. False alarm had caused panic. Someone had started a real fire during the confusion, likely as a prank gone wrong. The stampede into restricted areas of the building had resulted in multiple injuries but no fatalities. The foundry was shut down pending investigation into code violations and inadequate emergency procedures. But Quinn knew the real count was wrong. She had been in a venue with 3,000 people. The crowd on the pavement, being treated by paramedics and loaded into ambulances, numbered maybe 300. Where were the others? Where were the people who had been directed right at the junction instead of left? Where were the ones with empty eyes who had been sitting in those chairs? The police would not answer those questions. The media did not ask them. The venue ownership dissolved overnight into a web of shell corporations that led nowhere. The security company did not exist in any registry. The man in white was never identified or sought. Quinn spent 3 weeks giving statements to police and federal investigators who seemed less interested in what happened than in making sure her story matched the official narrative. Her posts online about the experience were deleted within hours. Her account suspended for spreading misinformation, then reinstated with apologies blaming algorithmic errors. Twice she noticed men in black tactical uniforms standing across the street from her apartment, just watching. Once she saw one of them in the grocery store, following her through the aisles, never buying anything, just watching. She moved to another city, changed her phone number, deleted all social media, and stopped going to concerts entirely. Stopped going anywhere with large crowds and single points of exit. Now she works from home, orders groceries for delivery, and has 3 different escape routes planned from her second-floor apartment. She does not talk about what happened, because talking about it means remembering the empty eyes, the man in white, the feeling of her mind being rewritten by words in a language she should not understand. Sometimes at night she still hears the chanting, that rhythmic knot language that made her teeth ache and her thoughts bend in wrong directions. Sometimes she wonders if she really escaped, or if part of her is still down there in that room under the city, sitting in a metal chair with her hands folded in her lap, waiting for instructions from someone in a clean white suit. The real horror is not fire, or stampedes, or even the underground room that should not exist. The real horror is understanding that 3,000 people walked into a concert venue that night, and most of them never walked out. They were sorted, processed, taken somewhere for purposes Quinn can only guess at, and no one is looking for them. No one is asking questions. The machine that runs beneath the surface of normal life opened its mouth and swallowed them whole, and the world simply adjusted its numbers and moved on. And Quinn is left knowing that safety is an illusion, that the people who promise to protect you might be leading you towards something worse than any disaster they claim to prevent, and that sometimes the only difference between the ones who escape and the ones who disappear is timing and terrible luck. Dakota had been driving delivery routes through the Tennessee valleys for 6 years, long enough to know every back road and shortcut, every truck stop that stayed open past midnight, every stretch of highway where state troopers like to sit waiting for speeders. The night shift paid better and suited his temperament. He liked the solitude, the empty roads, the way the world felt when most people were asleep. That Friday in November, he had one package left on his manifest, a residential delivery to an address in the old factory district on the east side of Knoxville. His wife had texted him around 9, asking when he would be home, reminding him that their daughter was waiting for her bedtime story. Dakota had replied that he would be back by midnight. He had never broken a promise to his little girl, and he did not intend to start tonight. The GPS took him along the usual route, Interstate 40 to the Morrison exit, then surface streets through the warehouse district. But Dakota missed the turn, distracted by another text from his wife, asking him to pick up milk on the way home. By the time he realized his mistake, he was 3 miles past his exit, and the GPS was recalculating with that passive-aggressive patience that made him want to throw the device out the window. He could backtrack, add 15 minutes to his trip, or he could take the shortcut through the industrial park that would shave 10 minutes off. He knew these streets. He had driven them 100 times during daylight. At night, they would be empty, straight shot through, easy navigation. Dakota took the turn onto Industrial Parkway, a 4-lane road that cut through the old textile manufacturing district. Most of the factories had closed in the 90s when production moved overseas, leaving behind massive brick buildings with broken windows and faded paint. A few businesses still operated, third-shift warehouses and distribution centers, their parking lots dotted with semi-trucks and harsh security lighting. Between them, stretches of darkness where streetlights had burned out and never been replaced. The GPS signal flickered, the blue dot representing his van jumping around the screen, then disappeared entirely. Dakota cursed and pulled over near an intersection, trying to get his bearings the old-fashioned way, looking at street signs and matching them to his printed map. That was when he noticed the man. He stood beside a white panel van about 30 feet away, having a cigarette, the orange glow bright in the darkness. The man was weathered, maybe 50 years old, with gray stubble and a canvas work jacket. He looked over when Dakota's van stopped and after a moment started walking toward him, with the casual confidence of someone offering help to a stranger. Dakota rolled down his window halfway, keeping the engine running, his foot on the brake. The man leaned down, exhaling smoke, and smiled in a friendly way. "Lost?" he asked, his accent pure, East Tennessee mountain drawl. "GPS crapped out," Dakota replied, gesturing at the useless device. "Trying to get to Riverside Avenue." The man nodded slowly, taking another drag. "Riverside is a mess of one-ways and dead ends from here. Easy to get turned around. I know these streets pretty well. Been working this area for 20 years. I could show you the way if you want. My shift just ended." Dakota hesitated. Every instinct he had developed over 6 years of night driving told him not to let strangers into his vehicle. But the man seemed normal enough. Working class, tired, just someone trying to be helpful. And Dakota was losing time. Midnight was looking less certain with every passing minute. Before he could think it through properly, before his better judgment could override his impatience, he heard himself saying, "Yeah, all right, appreciate it." The man walked around to the passenger side and climbed in, bringing with him the smell of cigarette smoke and industrial grease. He settled into the seat with a grunt of satisfaction, like he was grateful to be off his feet. "Name's Carl," he said, extending a hand. Dakota shook it briefly, then put the van in gear. "Take a left here," Carl said, pointing ahead, "then straight for about half a mile." They drove in silence for a few minutes, following Carl's directions through progressively narrower streets. The buildings got older, more decrepit. Windows not just broken but missing entirely. Roofs sagging under the weight of neglect. The streetlights became less frequent until they were driving through near total darkness. Dakota's headlights the only illumination. He glanced at his GPS again. Still no signal. He tried his phone. Same dead network message. "Not much signal out here," Carl said, noticing Dakota's attempts. "Something about the old buildings. Metal frames interfere with it or something." Dakota nodded, but unease was starting to coil in his stomach. They had been driving for nearly 10 minutes, and nothing looked familiar. This did not feel like a route to Riverside Avenue. This felt like they were going deeper into the industrial maze, further from civilization rather than toward it. "How much further?" Dakota asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Not far," Carl replied. "You know, you look familiar. You deliver around here regular?" "Sometimes. Depends on the route." Carl nodded thoughtfully. "There was another delivery guy went missing around here, maybe 8-9 months ago. They found his van with all the packages still in it, but he was gone. Just vanished. Never did figure out what happened to him." The way Carl said it, conversational and matter of fact, made Dakota's blood run cold. It was not a warning or an expression of concern. It was just information, delivered with a strange kind of satisfaction. Dakota's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He slowed the van, looking for a place wide enough to turn around. The street was too narrow, brick walls close on both sides, no alleys or turnoffs visible. "I think we should head back," Dakota said. "This does not feel right." Carl turned to look at him fully for the first time, and his expression had changed. The friendly helpfulness was gone, replaced by something flat and calculating. "You mentioned your little girl earlier," Carl said quietly. "On the phone. The bedtime story. That is sweet. Family man. I respect that." Dakota had not been on a call when Carl got in the van. He had been reading a text silently. There was no way Carl could have known about his daughter or the bedtime story unless he had been paying much closer attention than a casual stranger should. Unless he had been listening before he approached. Unless he had been waiting specifically for Dakota. Dakota slammed the brakes and threw the van into reverse. Carl lunged across the center console, grabbing for the keys in the ignition. They struggled, Dakota trying to push Carl back while keeping control of the vehicle. The van lurched backward, engine revving, and Dakota felt Carl's fingers close around the keyring. Dakota released the steering wheel and swung his handheld package scanner, a chunky device the size of a brick, against the side of Carl's head. The impact made a sound like a hammer hitting wood. Carl's grip loosened, and he recoiled, a cut opening above his right eye, blood immediately seeping down his face. Carl touched the blood, looked at his fingers, and smiled slowly. It was the worst thing Dakota had ever seen, that smile spreading across a bleeding face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "You have no idea where you are, do you?" Carl said, his voice still calm. "These streets are not on any map. They loop. They fold back on themselves. You could drive for hours and never find your way out. But I know them. I know every turn, every dead end. Good luck, Dakota." Carl knew his name. Dakota had never told him his name. Carl opened the passenger door and stepped out into the darkness, walking away unhurried, whistling something tuneless. Dakota locked the doors with shaking hands and sat for a moment, engine still running, trying to process what had just happened. His phone was still dead, the GPS still blank. He looked around at the narrow street, the looming buildings, the darkness pressing against his headlights, and realized, with mounting horror, that he genuinely did not know which direction would lead him out. He started driving, trying every turn he came to, mapping the route in his head. But within minutes, he lost track of where he had been. The streets all looked the same. Brick walls, broken pavement, intersections that came too quickly or not quickly enough. Twice he was certain he had been down the same street already, recognized a particular pattern of broken windows or a piece of graffiti. He was going in circles. The industrial district was not that large. He should have hit a main road by now, should have found his way to the perimeter, but instead he kept encountering new turns, new alleys, streets that seemed to appear where they had not been moments before. Dakota's panic was complete now, his breathing rapid, sweat running down his back despite the cold November night. He checked the time, 10:45. He was going to miss his daughter's bedtime. He was going to break his promise. The thought made him want to cry. He tried the phone again. Still nothing. He considered abandoning the van and walking, but the idea of being on foot in this place was somehow worse than being locked in the vehicle. He drove for another 30 minutes, maybe longer, time becoming meaningless in the maze. Then he saw something different. Fresh tire tracks in the dust, multiple vehicles leading toward what looked like a loading bay with a dim light above it. Dakota followed the tracks, feeling like a drowning man grabbing at anything that might float. The loading bay opened into a service corridor, barely wide enough for the van. Dakota did not care. He drove through it, scraping the side mirrors against the walls, and burst out onto a service road he recognized. Real pavement, real streetlights. The GPS blinked back to life, signal restored. Dakota drove straight home, exceeding every speed limit, running yellow lights, not caring. He pulled into his driveway at 2 a.m. His wife met him at the door, her face streaked with tears, anger and relief warring in her expression. She had been calling him for hours. He had not received a single call. Their daughter was asleep, bedtime story told by her mother instead. Dakota held his wife and sobbed into her shoulder, unable to explain, unable to form words around what had happened. He called in sick the next day and went to the police. They took his statement with barely concealed skepticism. They looked for Carl based on Dakota's description but found nothing. The white panel van did not appear on any traffic cameras. They sent a patrol through the industrial district and reported that while parts of it were confusing and poorly marked, nothing matched Dakota's description of looping streets and impossible navigation. They found no evidence of anyone living in the abandoned buildings. 3 other delivery drivers had vanished in the area over 18 months. This part was true, but there were no leads and no evidence connecting their disappearances. Dakota requested a transfer to day shifts and got it. His daughter is 8 now and still does not understand why her father will not drive after dark anymore, why he refuses delivery jobs, why he gets tense when the GPS signal drops. His wife knows something happened that night, but Dakota has never told her the full story. How do you explain that there are streets in your own city that do not follow normal rules, that loop and fold and trap people who enter them? How do you explain Carl, who knew his name and his daughter's bedtime routine, who smiled with blood running down his face and walked away whistling into darkness? Dakota still has nightmares about those streets. In the dreams, he is driving the van again, following Carl's directions, and no matter how many turns he takes, he always ends up back at the same intersection where Carl stands waiting beside his white panel van, smiling, ready to get in. And in the dreams, Dakota always unlocks the door and lets him in, because the alternative is admitting that he is already lost, already trapped in the maze, and has been since the moment he took that first wrong turn. The real horror was not that someone tried to trap him in that maze of streets. The real horror was realizing those streets were designed to trap people, that they had been doing it for years, and that Carl was just one of many who knew how they worked. The delivery drivers who vanished were not killed or kidnapped in any conventional sense. They were simply absorbed into the geometry of those impossible streets, driving in circles until their gas ran out or their minds broke, while people like Carl watched and smiled and waited for the next lost driver to stop and ask for directions. And somewhere in East Knoxville, those streets still exist, waiting patient and hungry for the next person who takes a shortcut to save 10 minutes and ends up losing everything. Charlie needed to get away from screens for a while, away from the endless Zoom meetings and Slack notifications that had turned his apartment into a digital prison. At 29, he had spent the last 3 years working remotely as a software developer, and the pandemic had erased whatever boundaries still existed between his professional and personal life. When his company announced they were going fully remote permanently, Charlie decided to take advantage of the flexibility. He rented a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina for a month, planning to work during the day and hike during evenings and weekends. The listing showed exactly what he wanted. Rustic cabin built in the 30s, completely renovated with modern amenities including satellite internet, situated on 10 acres of private forested land with mountain views. The owner was an elderly woman named Mrs. Calloway, who met him at the property with the keys and a folder full of instructions about the well water system, the wood stove, and the septic tank. She walked him through the cabin, pointing out where things were, her movements slow but precise. Then she took him outside and showed him the root cellar, a stone structure built into the hillside behind the cabin, its heavy wooden door secured with an old padlock crusted with rust. "This is the only rule I have," Mrs. Calloway said, her voice taking on a different quality, something harder beneath the grandmotherly tone. "Do not open this cellar. I do not care what you hear coming from it. Old pipes make noise. Animals get underneath sometimes. Wind does strange things in the mountains. But you do not open this door. Do you understand?" Charlie had laughed, thinking she was joking or maybe just eccentric in the way people who lived alone in the mountains often became. He promised he would leave it alone, took the keys, and watched her drive down the long gravel road until her taillights disappeared into the trees. The first week was perfect. He worked from the cabin's main room, laptop on the dining table, coffee always hot on the wood stove. The internet was surprisingly good. He hiked every evening, exploring the trails that wound through the property. He slept better than he had in years, the mountain silence so complete it felt like being wrapped in cotton. The second week, he started hearing things, scratching sounds underneath the floorboards at night, like something with claws trying to get through the wood. He assumed it was raccoons or possums that had gotten into the crawlspace. Then one night, he woke to knocking. 3 sharp knocks from beneath the cabin, directly under his bed. He lay there in the darkness, listening, and the knocking came again. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. Rhythmic, deliberate. Not the random sounds of an animal, but something that felt intentional, like someone was trying to communicate. Charlie got out of bed and went outside with a flashlight, checking the foundation looking for gaps where an animal might have entered. He found nothing. The knocking stopped when he was outside and started again when he went back in. It continued intermittently for the next 2 nights, always the same pattern, always from underneath. Then, on the 4th night of the knocking, Charlie heard something different. A child crying. Faint, but unmistakable, the sound of a young child sobbing, and it was coming from the root cellar. He stood on the back porch in his pajamas and bare feet, flashlight in hand, listening. The crying was desperate, the kind of sound that triggered every protective instinct. It rose and fell, punctuated by gasping breaths, and it sounded so real, so human, that Charlie found himself walking toward the cellar before he consciously decided to move. The padlock was old but solid. He pulled on it and felt it hold firm. The crying got louder, more urgent, and between the sobs he heard words. "Please, please help me. It hurts, please." Charlie went back into the cabin and found a heavy rock from the fire pit. He brought it to the cellar and smashed it against the padlock 3 times before the rusted metal gave way. The hasp fell free and the door swung open on its own, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The crying stopped immediately. Complete silence. Charlie stood at the threshold, flashlight beam cutting through the black, illuminating rough stone walls and earthen floor. The air that came up from below was cold and smelled like minerals and wet soil and something else, something organic and wrong. He should have closed the door, should have walked away right then, but he had already opened it, had already broken Mrs. Calloway's one rule, and he needed to know what was down there. He descended the steps slowly, counting them, reaching 12 before his feet touched the floor. The cellar was larger than he expected, stretching back beyond the reach of his flashlight. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them, crisscrossing the stone in chaotic patterns. Some were old, worn smooth by time. Others were fresh, the stone beneath them still pale where it had been recently exposed. Charlie moved deeper into the space and realized it was not just a cellar, but a tunnel, carved into the mountain itself. It continued back into darkness, sloping downward, the walls narrowing and then widening again. He walked for what felt like several minutes, his flashlight showing him more scratches, more marks on the walls that looked increasingly deliberate, increasingly like language or symbols he could not read. Then he heard footsteps behind him, not the soft pad of bare feet, but the click of nails on stone, multiple limbs moving in coordination. He spun around and his flashlight caught movement, something pale and segmented pulling itself back around a corner, moving impossibly fast. Charlie ran. He ran back through the tunnel toward the stairs, his breath loud in, his ears, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind him, he heard the clicking footsteps multiply, more than one thing moving, coming from different directions. The tunnel seemed longer going back, the turns unfamiliar, and for a terrible moment, he thought he had gotten turned around, that he was going deeper instead of returning to the surface. Then he saw the stairs and threw himself up them, taking them 3 at a time. He burst out into the night air and turned to slam the door shut, but something was in the way. A limb, pale and jointed wrong, with too many segments pushed through the gap. Charlie threw his weight against the door and felt the limb withdraw. He slammed the door closed and looked around frantically for something to secure it with. The broken padlock was useless. He ran to his car, started the engine, and drove. Did not stop to grab his laptop or his clothes or anything from inside the cabin. Just drove down the mountain in his pajamas, barefoot, hands shaking on the wheel. He did not stop until he reached a gas station 30 miles away. Fluorescent lights and people, and the blessed ordinary world. He called Mrs. Calloway from the gas station payphone, his voice high and thin. She answered on the second ring, like she had been expecting his call. "You opened it," she said. It was not a question. "There was something down there," Charlie said. "What was that? What did you have locked in your cellar?" Mrs. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. "I told you not to open it," she said finally. "I told you what would happen. Now it knows you're out here. Now it knows what you look like, what you smell like. It will come looking for you. They always do once they get a scent. They? Charlie asked. How many are there? That is not the question you should be asking, Mrs. Calloway said. The question is how long before they find you. She hung up. Charlie tried to report it to police, but when he called the county sheriff and explained, they were polite but dismissive. They sent a deputy to check the property the next day. The deputy reported back that he had searched the cabin and the cellar thoroughly. The cellar was empty, just old storage with some shelves and dirt floor. No tunnel. No scratches on the walls. The deputy suggested Charlie had perhaps been drinking or using recreational drugs. Mrs. Calloway confirmed she had warned Charlie about the cellar, said he must have had a nightmare or hallucination of some kind. The property was fine. His belongings were packed and ready for pickup. Charlie never went back. He paid someone else to collect his things. He checked satellite images of the property online and found the cabin exactly where it should be. But the area around it was blurred in the images, the way government facilities or military installations sometimes are. He tried to find information about the property's history but came up with nothing. No records of the Calloway family owning land in that area. No history of mining or caves in that specific location. The rental listing disappeared from the website. When he tried to contact the company that managed it, they had no record of the property or the booking. Charlie moved to a city apartment, 4th floor, concrete and steel construction, no basement. He researches every building before he enters it, checks for underground access points, avoids anywhere with tunnels or subway connections nearby. He has not hiked or camped since that night, has not gone anywhere that could be described as rural or isolated. He sleeps with lights on and wakes multiple times each night to sounds that probably come from the building's heating system or neighbors overhead, but might be something else. Might be clicking limbs on concrete. Might be something pale and segmented that knows his scent. Last month, he woke at 3 a.m. to knocking. 3 sharp knocks from directly beneath his 4th floor apartment, which should be impossible because there are 3 floors and a basement between him and the ground. The knocking came again. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. The same pattern he heard in the cabin. He got up and checked every window, every door, found them all locked and secure. The knocking continued through the night, moving from beneath him to the walls, to the ceiling, to the pipes. In the morning, he found fresh scratches on his front door, deep gouges in the wood that had not been there the night before. Charlie has been looking for a new place to live, somewhere without underground parking or basement storage, somewhere high up with clear sight lines in all directions. But he is starting to understand what Mrs. Calloway meant. They're looking for him. They got his scent when he entered their space, broke the seal that kept them contained, and now they're tracking him. Every place he goes, every apartment he rents, they eventually find him. The knocking starts. The scratches appear, and each time they get a little closer, a little more bold, a little more present in his life. The real horror is not what he found in the cellar or what chased him up those stone steps. The real horror is understanding that some things are kept locked away for good reason, that the warnings we dismiss as superstition or eccentricity often come from hard-earned knowledge, and that once you break certain seals, once you let certain things know you exist, there is no going back. The lock was not keeping something imprisoned. It was keeping something contained, keeping it from knowing about the world above, keeping it from learning that people exist to be hunted. And Charlie broke that lock. Charlie taught them about the surface world. Charlie gave them a scent to follow. And now, for the rest of his life, he will be looking over his shoulder, listening for knocking in the walls, checking for scratches on his doors, knowing that eventually they will stop playing games and finish what they started in that tunnel under the mountain. Blake had been hiking the Appalachian Trail in sections for 3 years, tackling it piece by piece during weekends and vacation time, chipping away at the dream of completing the entire 2,000-mile journey before turning 30. At 27, he was in the best shape of his life, experienced enough to handle difficult terrain, and confident in his ability to navigate wilderness areas. That late October weekend, he planned to hike a 15-mile section in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, a stretch known for being relatively easy with well-maintained trail markers. The weather forecast looked perfect: clear skies, temperatures in the 50s, no precipitation expected. He told his roommate he would be back Sunday evening, left a copy of his route plan on the kitchen counter, and drove to the trailhead alone. He had done this dozens of times before. There was no reason to think this trip would be different from any other. The trail started at a parking area off Route 219, marked with the familiar white blaze painted on a wooden post. Blake shouldered his pack, checked his GPS watch, and started walking. The first few miles were exactly what he expected. Well-worn path, gentle elevation gain, the forest canopy filtering golden October sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. He passed a few other hikers going the opposite direction, exchanged the usual trail greetings, kept moving. Around mile 5, he noticed the white blazes were getting harder to find. They should have appeared every 100 yards or so, painted on trees at eye level to mark the official trail, but the gaps between markers were stretching longer. He would walk for several minutes without seeing one, then spot a faded blaze so worn he almost missed it. Blake checked his GPS watch and found the trail he was walking did not quite match the route on his downloaded map. Close, but offset by maybe 50 feet. He had experienced this before in areas where the trail had been rerouted, but digital maps had not been updated. He kept going, trusting the blazes when he could find them, following what looked like the most used path when he could not. Around mile 7, he saw something that made him stop walking. Hanging from a pine branch about 10 feet ahead, suspended by fishing line, was a doll. Not a modern toy, but something old, handmade, with a cloth body and a painted porcelain face. It turned slowly in the breeze, its empty eyes staring at nothing. Blake stood for a moment, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. People left strange things in the woods sometimes. Memorials, art installations, personal totems. It was weird but not necessarily sinister. Then he looked up and saw there were more of them. Dozens of dolls hanging from branches on both sides of the trail, creating a corridor of suspended figures that extended as far as he could see ahead. They were all different. Some looked antique, others more recent. Some were intact, others missing limbs or heads. All of them hung at roughly the same height, all facing the trail. Blake felt his skin crawl. This was deliberate, arranged with purpose, and the purpose was not good. He pulled out his phone to take a photo and maybe get signal to report this to park rangers. No service. He was still too deep in the forest. He turned around, intending to backtrack to the last clear trail marker and find an alternate route. The path behind him looked different. The ground was more overgrown than he remembered, covered in leaves and fallen branches like it had not been used in months. That was impossible. He had walked this exact section not 10 minutes ago. Blake heard laughter. Children's laughter, high and musical, coming from somewhere in the trees to his left. He turned toward the sound and saw nothing but dense forest. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone there? Are you lost?" The laughter came again, closer now, from his right. Then ahead of him, then behind, surrounding him. He started walking quickly back the way he had come, watching the ground, trying to retrace his steps. The dolls above him began moving, spinning on their lines faster than the light wind could account for. Some were swinging back and forth. The laughter turned into whispers, words he could not quite make out, multiple voices overlapping. Blake broke into a run. The trail ahead was barely visible under the leaves. More suggestion than actual path. He crashed through underbrush, branches whipping his face, his pack bouncing hard on his shoulders. He ran for maybe 10 minutes before breaking through tree line into a clearing and stopping so fast he nearly fell. In the center of the clearing stood the remains of a homestead. Old foundation stones, a collapsed chimney, pieces of wall frame still standing like ribs. And inside the ruin, arranged in a perfect circle on the dirt floor, were more dolls. These ones were standing upright, all facing inward toward the center of the circle where a backpack sat. Modern hiking pack, bright blue, completely out of place among the decay. Blake approached slowly, his heart hammering. He recognized the pack. He had seen it in missing person posters at the trailhead parking lot. A hiker named Marcus Chen had disappeared on this section of trail 3 weeks ago. His car had been found in the lot, but he had never returned. Park rangers had searched for a week and found nothing. Blake knelt beside the pack and unzipped it with shaking hands. Inside, he found a wallet with Marcus's ID, a water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, everything a hiker would need, except the hiker himself. Blake stood and turned in a slow circle, looking at the ruins, the surrounding trees, the dolls watching him with their painted eyes. "Marcus," he called out. "Are you here? Can you hear me?" Footsteps on the wooden porch that no longer existed. Blake spun toward the sound and saw children standing in the doorway that was just empty air. 3 of them, wearing old-fashioned clothing, dark dresses and knickers and bare feet. Their faces were wrong, too pale, too smooth, features not quite in the right proportions. Their eyes were solid black, no whites, no irises, just glossy darkness that reflected the afternoon light. They stood perfectly still, watching him. Blake took a step backward, and one of them tilted its head at an angle that was too far, too sharp, bones bending in ways bones should not bend. Its mouth opened, and children's laughter poured out, but its lips did not move, did not shape the sound, just hung open like a door, while something else used it as a speaker. Blake ran. He grabbed Marcus's pack along with his own, and crashed back into the forest on the opposite side of the clearing from where he had entered. Behind him, he heard the children following, not running, just walking with steady purpose, their footsteps somehow audible over his own panicked crashing through underbrush. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs went rubbery, and he had to stop, bent over, hands on knees, gasping. When he looked up, he was standing on a paved road, Route 219, the highway that ran past the trailhead. He had found his way out. He looked back at the forest and saw nothing. No children, no dolls, just normal trees in normal October sunlight. A car approached and Blake stepped into the road waving his arms. The car stopped, and an elderly man rolled down his window. "You all right, son? You look like you have seen a ghost." Blake asked for a ride to the trailhead parking lot. The man agreed, and Blake climbed into the passenger seat, still carrying both packs. During the drive, the old man asked where Blake had been hiking. When Blake described the area, the old man went quiet for a moment. "That is the Witch Hollow," he said finally. "Folks around here know better than to go up there. There was a woman lived in those woods back in the 1800s. Her children died of scarlet fever one winter, and she lost her mind, made dolls to replace them, talked to them like they were real. When she died, they say the dolls kept her company, and now they collect others to keep them company too. Anyone who goes missing in those woods, that is where they end up, part of the collection." Blake reported everything to park rangers that afternoon, told them about the homestead, the dolls, Marcus's pack, the children he had seen. The rangers organized a search party that went out the next morning. Blake tried to show them where he had been but could not find the clearing. They hiked for hours, covering the area Blake described, and found nothing. No homestead ruins, no dolls hanging from trees, no evidence that Blake had been there at all except the pack he was carrying, which was confirmed to belong to Marcus Chen. The rangers asked how Blake had found the pack. He told them the truth. They did not believe him. They suggested Blake might have been experiencing altitude sickness or dehydration, that he might have hallucinated some of what he described. They asked if he had taken anything from Marcus's pack. They asked if he and Marcus had known each other before. The questions became an interrogation. Blake was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, but the case of Marcus Chen remained open and unsolved. The pack was returned to Marcus's family. Blake never went back to that section of trail, never went back to West Virginia at all. He stopped solo hiking and stopped hiking anywhere in Appalachia. He moved to Colorado and hikes only well-trafficked trails in national parks, never alone, always with groups. He tried to warn other hikers online about the Witch Hollow, but his posts were dismissed as creepypasta or ghost stories. No one took them seriously. Marcus Chen is still officially missing. 2 other hikers have disappeared in that area since Blake's encounter. Their cars found in the parking lot. Their gear missing. No bodies recovered. Blake thinks about them often. Thinks about what might be happening to them in that clearing he cannot find again, surrounded by dolls and watched by things that wear the shapes of children, but are not children at all. He thinks about the old man's words. They collect others to keep them company. He wonders if Marcus is still alive, in some sense, trapped in that hollow part of the collection. He wonders if the children he saw were once hikers too, transformed into something else by whatever lives in those woods. He wonders if he was supposed to join them, if grabbing Marcus's pack and running was breaking some rule, and if that means they are still looking for him, still expecting him to come back and complete what he started. Last month, Blake received a package at his apartment in Denver. No return address. Inside was a doll, cloth body, porcelain face, painted eyes. Attached to it was a tag with his name written in childish handwriting. Nothing else. No note, no explanation. Blake burned it in his fireplace and threw the ashes in the dumpster. 3 days later, another package arrived. Same doll, same tag, same handwriting. He burned that one too. They keep coming, one every few days. Always the same. He has stopped burning them because it does not matter. They keep arriving anyway. Now he just leaves them in the packages, stacks them in his closet, tries not to think about what it means. The real horror is not the dolls, or the children, or even what happened to Marcus Chen. The real horror is understanding that some places in the mountains operate under rules that have nothing to do with the modern world, that they have their own logic and their own purposes, and that stumbling into them by accident does not excuse you from their requirements. Blake entered the Witch Hollow. He took something from it. And now it wants him back. The dolls are reminders. The packages are invitations. And eventually Blake knows his resistance will weaken. Eventually the pull to return will be too strong. Eventually he will find himself driving back to West Virginia, parking at that trailhead, walking into those woods. Not because he wants to, but because some debts cannot be escaped, only postponed. And the Witch Hollow has all the time in the world to wait for him to come home. Emerson had been working as a freelance journalist for 8 years, specializing in pieces about forgotten corners of America, the places that appeared on maps but had long since been abandoned by progress and memory. At 31, she had documented ghost towns across the Southwest, interviewed the last remaining residents of dying mill towns in New England, and photographed abandoned industrial sites in the Rust Belt. When a regional magazine commissioned her to write about lost Appalachian communities, she spent weeks researching, combing through historical records and census data, looking for stories that had never been properly told. That was when she found references to Ashford Creek, a coal town in southern West Virginia that had simply disappeared from all records after 1952. Not gradually declined, not slowly abandoned, but gone. 73 residents all vanished overnight. No bodies, no explanation, just an empty town that stopped appearing on maps. Emerson drove to the coordinates she had extracted from pre-1952 property records, parking her Jeep on a Forest Service road and hiking in with her camera equipment and notebook. The area was heavily forested now, no sign that a town had ever existed here. She walked for about 20 minutes checking her GPS and was about to give up when fog rolled in. It came fast, unnaturally fast, thick gray banks of it pouring down the mountainside like water, swallowing the trees and reducing visibility to almost nothing. Emerson stopped walking, waiting for it to clear, but it only got denser. She pulled out her phone to activate the flashlight and found she had no signal at all. Not unusual this deep in the mountains, but the phone itself felt strange, heavy, and cold in her hand. Through the fog ahead, she saw shapes, buildings. She moved closer, and the shapes became clearer. A main street, storefronts, houses, an entire town preserved perfectly, looking exactly like a 1950s coal community. Cars were parked along the street, 1940s and early 50s models, chrome gleaming through the mist. Shop windows displayed goods with price tags visible. A barbershop pole still turned lazily. Smoke rose from chimneys on the houses. Lights glowed in windows. But there were no people. The street was completely empty. Emerson walked down the middle of the road, her footsteps making no sound on the pavement, documenting everything with her camera. A diner with a neon sign reading Betty's showed coffee cups on tables, food on plates, cigarettes still smoking in ashtrays. She reached out to touch the window, and her fingers passed through it like it was made of nothing more substantial than the fog itself. Not glass, just the suggestion of glass. She pulled her hand back and looked at her fingers. They were wet with condensation, but otherwise fine. This was not real, could not be real, yet she could see it, smell it, the scent of coal smoke and fried food and old coffee hanging in the air. She continued down the street, passing a general store with its door propped open, a barber shop with chairs positioned in front of mirrors, a post office with mail sorted into boxes behind the counter. Everything looked occupied, used, lived in, but empty of life. At the end of the street stood a white clapboard church with a tall steeple. The doors were open and she could hear music coming from inside, an organ playing a hymn she did not recognize. Emerson climbed the steps and entered. The interior was lit by oil lamps mounted on the walls, their flames steady despite the absolute lack of any draft. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward an altar at the front, and in those pews sat people. The congregation was complete. Men in suits, women in dresses, children in Sunday clothes, all sitting perfectly still, all facing forward, all utterly silent even though the organ continued playing. Emerson walked slowly down the center aisle, her camera forgotten in her hand, staring at the people. They did not breathe, did not move, did not blink. They were not exactly transparent like the windows had been, but they had a quality to them that was not quite solid, not quite real, like photographs projected onto the fog. "Hello," Emerson called out. Her voice sounded muffled, absorbed by the thick air. None of the people reacted. The organ kept playing. She reached out to touch the nearest person, an elderly woman in a blue dress with a white collar. Her hand passed through the woman's shoulder exactly as it had passed through the window. These were not ghosts in any traditional sense. They were impressions, memories, recordings played on endless loop in this fog-trapped pocket of time. Emerson backed away and turned toward the altar. A preacher stood there now, though he had not been there a moment before. He wore a black suit and held a Bible, and, unlike the congregation, he was looking directly at her. His face was wrong. No features at all, just smooth skin where eyes and nose and mouth should be. The organ music stopped abruptly, and in the silence that followed, Emerson heard the church bell begin to ring, deafening peals that made her drop her camera and press her hands to her ears. The congregation stood as one, every person rising simultaneously, and they all turned their heads toward her. All of them had the same featureless faces, smooth expanses of flesh with nothing to distinguish one from another. They began walking toward her, moving in perfect unison, their feet making no sound on the wooden floorboards. Emerson ran. She sprinted back up the aisle and out the church doors, hearing behind her the rustle of clothing, the mechanical precision of dozens of bodies moving together. Outside, the fog had grown impossibly thick, so dense she could barely see her own hands. The town was still there, but changed. The buildings closer together, the streets narrower, the layout different from moments before. She was lost immediately. Emerson ran blindly, crashing into things she could not see, fog shapes that felt solid 1 second and empty the next. She heard footsteps all around her, the soft tread of many feet, the congregation spreading out through the streets, searching. They did not call out or make any sound except for their footsteps. The fog pressed against her like it had weight, like it was trying to slow her down, hold her in place. She fought through it, lungs burning, heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Then ahead, cutting through the gray, she saw light. Real light. Warm and yellow and solid. She ran toward it and found an elderly woman standing at what appeared to be the edge of the fog, holding an old-fashioned oil lantern. The woman was real, solid, her face deeply lined with age, her eyes sharp and clear. "Run toward the light," she said, her voice cutting through the muffling effect of the fog. "Do not look back. Do not stop. Just run." Emerson did not question it. She ran past the woman, toward where the lantern light pointed. And suddenly she was through, bursting out of the fog into normal forest, clear air, afternoon sunlight slanting through the trees. She turned and saw the fog behind her, a solid wall of gray that did not dissipate or spread but stayed contained in a specific area of the forest, like it was held in place by invisible boundaries. The woman with the lantern stood at the edge, still visible through the mist. She made a shooing gesture. "Go now. They cannot leave the fog, but they will try. They always try." Emerson stumbled back to where she thought her Jeep was parked and found it exactly where she had left it. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. She drove down the mountain without looking back, did not stop until she reached a gas station in the nearest town, a place called Bramwell that had cell service, and other people, and the blessed normalcy of a modern civilization. She sat in her Jeep in the parking lot and tried to process what had happened. Her camera was gone, left behind in the church when she dropped it. All her photos lost, all her evidence. She went into the gas station and asked the attendant about Ashford Creek. The man, grizzled and suspicious, studied her for a long moment before answering. "You have been to the fog," he said. It was not a question. "My great-grandmother was from Ashford Creek. She got out the night it happened. She was the only one. Spent the rest of her life trying to warn people away, trying to keep the fog contained. Our family has done it for 3 generations now, watching, waiting with lanterns when someone wanders in by accident. Most do not make it out." He explained what his family knew. In 1952, Ashford Creek had made a deal. The town was failing, the coal seams running dry, poverty and desperation setting in. The mine owner, a man named Sutton, claimed he had found a way to ensure prosperity, to keep the town alive. He convinced the residents to participate in a ritual, promised them wealth and security. What he actually did was bind the entire town to something old, something that had been sleeping in the mountain, something that fed on community and belief and the collective soul of a place. The ritual worked in a way. The town was preserved perfectly, but the cost was that everyone in it was consumed, transformed into those empty impressions, forever repeating their last day, forever trapped in the fog. "The fog tries to expand," the man said. "Every few years it reaches out, trying to take more land, more people. My family keeps it contained. We patrol the boundaries. We guide out anyone who wanders in. But someday, there will not be anyone left to do it. Someday, it will spread too far to stop." Emerson published her article as fiction. No editor would have accepted it as non-fiction, and she had no proof anyway. Her camera was gone. Her GPS had no record of the coordinates she had entered. The Forest Service had no record of any town called Ashford Creek ever existing in the area she described. Officially, it was all myth. Unofficially, she started having dreams. Every night, the same dream. She's walking through fog, hearing footsteps behind her, searching for a light that never appears. She wakes up with her clothes damp from condensation and her lungs aching like she has been running. Last month, she received a photograph in the mail. No note, no return address. The photograph showed the congregation from the church, all standing together in their Sunday clothes, all facing the camera with their blank, featureless faces. And standing in the back row, barely visible but unmistakable, was Emerson herself. She was in the photograph even though she had never stood still long enough for a picture. Even though she had escaped. The fog had captured her image anyway, had claimed some part of her. Emerson does not drive through Appalachia anymore, does not take assignments in rural areas, does not go anywhere that fog is forecast. She moved to Arizona, to the desert where humidity is low and mist almost never forms. But weather patterns change. Last week, she woke to find her Phoenix suburb covered in unseasonable fog. Thick gray banks of it that should not exist in the desert. Through her window, she could see shapes in the mist, buildings that were not there before, a church steeple rising above the houses, and standing on her front lawn, looking up at her window, was a figure holding an old lantern. The woman from the forest edge. She shook her head slowly, the gesture clear even through the fog. Too late, too far, cannot help anymore. The real horror is not that Ashford Creek was taken, or that 73 people were trapped in eternal repetition. The real horror is that the fog is growing, that despite the efforts of one family standing watch with their lanterns, despite the warnings and the boundaries, the thing that consumed that town is still hungry, still spreading, still reaching out across the years and the miles to claim those who witnessed its work. And Emerson has become part of its story now, her image captured in that photograph, her presence recorded in the fog's memory. She escaped physically but left something behind, something the fog considers payment for trespassing. And what the fog takes, it keeps forever, playing it on loop in the mist, waiting for the rest to follow. Reese was 25 years old and convinced he knew how to have a good time without getting into trouble. His cousin Tyler, 2 years older and significantly less convinced of anything, had talked him into a spring break road trip through rural Kentucky. They were both college students, Tyler finishing his senior year at Louisville, Reese working on a graduate degree in business administration. The plan was simple: drive through back roads, visit small towns, maybe find some authentic mountain culture and good stories to tell when they got back to civilization. Tyler claimed he knew a guy who could get them real moonshine, the kind you could not buy in stores, the kind that was still illegal and still made in copper stills hidden deep in the hills. They drove up a series of progressively worse roads following Tyler's GPS coordinates, each turn taking them further from anything resembling infrastructure. The last 10 miles were pure dirt, rutted and washed out, the truck bouncing so hard, Reese thought they might break an axle. Finally, they reached a clearing with 3 buildings arranged around it. A main house, a large barn, and a smaller cabin. No trespassing signs were posted on every tree at the clearing's edge. A man came out of the main house as they parked. He was in his 60s, weathered like old leather, wearing overalls and a faded flannel shirt. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they assessed Reese and Tyler with the kind of calculation that made Reese immediately uncomfortable. Tyler got out and did the talking, explaining about his friend's recommendation, asking about purchasing some authentic moonshine. The old man, who introduced himself only as Sutton, listened without expression. Then he smiled, a sudden transformation that did not reach his eyes, and gestured for them to follow him into the barn. Inside, the smell of fermentation was overwhelming, sour and chemical. Large copper stills dominated the space, tubes running between them, fires burning underneath. But there was something else too. Other equipment Reese did not recognize. Plastic barrels with warning labels, industrial drums, hoses, and filters that looked too modern and too complex for simple moonshine production. Sutton poured them samples from a ceramic jug, clear liquid that burned going down and tasted like paint thinner mixed with grain alcohol. Tyler loved it. immediately asking about buying a case. Reese drank his and tried not to cough, tried to be cool about it, but his eyes were watering and his throat felt raw. Sutton watched them drink with that same flat assessment, then poured them another round. They sat on hay bales and talked, Sutton telling stories about generations of mountain distilling, about federal agents and close calls, about the art of making liquor that could strip paint or cure a cold, depending on how you used it. The sun was setting when Reese finally checked his phone and realized they had been there for over 2 hours. He said they should probably head out, had a long drive back. Sutton's expression changed. The smile disappeared. "Cannot let you boys drive down that mountain drunk," he said, his voice taking on a different quality, harder beneath the folksy drawl. "You will wrap yourselves around a tree, get killed, stay the night, sleep it off, head out in the morning when you're sober." It was not really a request. Reese felt that immediately. Tyler, drunker or stupider or both, started to protest, said they would be fine, but Sutton was already standing, already moving toward the barn door, already calling out to someone. 3 other men appeared from the shadows at the clearing's edge, all carrying rifles, all moving with purpose toward Tyler's truck. They surrounded it casually, not threatening, just present, just blocking any potential exit. "Cabin across the way is set up for guests," Sutton said, gesturing to the smaller building. "Clean beds, working bathroom, get some rest. We will have breakfast in the morning, send you off proper." It was abundantly clear they had no choice. Reese and Tyler walked to the cabin under escort, 2 of the armed men flanking them. Inside, the cabin was exactly as described. 2 beds with clean sheets, a small bathroom, simple furniture, but the door locked from the outside. Reese heard the bolt slide home as soon as they were in. He went to the window and tested it. Bars. Decorative on the outside, painted to look rustic but solid steel underneath. "We are in trouble," Reese said quietly. Tyler still buzzed, waved him off, said it was mountain hospitality, said they were being paranoid. But as the night wore on and Tyler sobered up, the reality of their situation became clear. They were prisoners. Through gaps in the cabin's board walls, they could see the clearing lit by bonfires. The men were working, moving barrels, operating equipment that had nothing to do with moonshine. The smell that drifted across was chemical, acrid, burning the inside of Reese's nose even from a distance. This was not a moonshine operation. This was something else, something worse. Around midnight, Reese heard screaming. A woman's voice coming from the barn, high and desperate, begging for help. The screaming went on for maybe 3 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Reese and Tyler stood frozen in the cabin, staring at each other in the darkness, both too terrified to speak. They heard footsteps outside, heavy boots on gravel. Through the window, they saw 2 men carrying something wrapped in canvas toward the tree line. The way it hung between them, the shape and weight of it, left no doubt what they were carrying. Someone had died in that barn. Maybe multiple someones. Tyler started hyperventilating. Reese grabbed him, told him to stay quiet, told him they needed to think. The door was solid, the lock too strong to break. But the cabin was old, the boards weathered. Reese found a loose plank near the floor at the back of the cabin, worked it quietly until it came free. Then another. Within 30 minutes, they had created an opening just wide enough to squeeze through. They waited until 2 in the morning, when the fires in the clearing had died down and the men had gone into the main house. Then they slipped out through the gap they had created. The truck was guarded. 1 man sitting on the hood with a rifle across his lap, smoking a cigarette. No way to reach it without being seen. They would have to run into the forest, into the dark mountain wilderness with no supplies, no light, no idea which direction led to safety. Reese and Tyler looked at each other, counted to 3 silently, and ran. They crashed into the underbrush on the far side of the clearing, branches whipping their faces, roots trying to trip them. Behind them, someone shouted. Dogs started barking. Flashlight beams cut through the trees. They ran blindly downhill, figuring down eventually meant valley, meant water, meant following a stream to civilization. They ran for what felt like hours, lungs burning, legs cramping, terror pushing them beyond exhaustion. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them but never disappeared entirely. Once they heard dogs baying much closer and had to change direction. Twice they heard men calling to each other, coordinating, spreading out to search. The forest was completely dark, no moon visible through the canopy, and they moved more by feel than sight. Hands outstretched, stumbling over every obstacle. Dawn found them at a creek bed, both of them soaked in sweat and scratched bloody. Tyler's shirt torn completely off by branches, Reese's shoes missing, lost somewhere in the night. They followed the creek downhill and within an hour reached a dirt road. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy in a patrol car found them walking. The deputy, a young woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to their story with a grim expression that said she had heard versions of it before. She took them back to the station where they gave statements to a detective who explained that the Sutton compound had been suspected of drug manufacturing for years, but evidence had been impossible to obtain. The family had deep roots in the area, knew the terrain, knew when raids were coming. Multiple missing person cases connected to the property but never proven. The detective assembled a tactical team and they raided the compound that afternoon, found a massive methamphetamine lab operation in the barn and in underground bunkers nearby, found 3 bodies buried on the property, all identified as hikers or travelers who had gone missing over the past 2 years, found evidence that Sutton used the moonshine story to lure outsiders who would not be immediately missed, used them for labor, or killed them if they saw too much. Sutton and his associates were arrested. The property was seized and eventually destroyed. The trial made regional news, but never went national. Reese and Tyler were presented as lucky survivors, young men who escaped a dangerous situation through quick thinking. What the news did not cover was the nightmares. Tyler dropped out of school that semester, moved back home with his parents, developed PTSD severe enough to require medication and therapy. He cannot handle being around strangers, cannot go anywhere rural, cannot smell alcohol without panicking. Reese finished his degree but changed as a person. The confidence that had defined his early 20s was gone, replaced by hypervigilance and suspicion. He does not trust easily, does not take risks, does not deviate from well-traveled routes or established plans. His family thinks he matured, became more responsible. They do not know about the woman screaming in the barn, about running through darkness with dogs hunting them, about the very real understanding that they almost became bodies wrapped in canvas and buried in unmarked graves. Sometimes Reese drives past the turnoff for that mountain road. The state put up a gate now, locked the access, posted official no trespassing signs. The compound is gone, bulldozed and buried, but he knows others exist. Other families making money in the hills, other operations that lure in the unwary, other predators who know the mountains protect them from scrutiny. The news occasionally reports missing hikers or travelers last seen heading into rural areas. Sometimes they are found, often they are not, and Reese wonders how many of them stumbled into situations like his. How many were not as lucky or as fast. The real horror was not the meth lab or even the bodies buried on the property. The real horror was how normal it all seemed at first. An old man making moonshine, offering mountain hospitality, telling stories. How easy it was to ignore the red flags because Tyler knew someone who knew someone, because they wanted an authentic experience, because saying no would have been awkward or rude. The horror was understanding that being polite or trusting or adventurous can get you killed in places where law enforcement is an hour away and screaming brings no help. The horror was learning that evil does not always announce itself with obvious signs. Sometimes it offers you a drink and a smile and a place to sleep, then locks the door behind you and shows its true face only when escape seems impossible. And the horror was knowing that Tyler and Reese escaped not through any great intelligence or strength, but through dumb luck and desperate adrenaline, and that the difference between survival and becoming another buried body came down to one loose board in an old cabin.